Welcome to Your Strata Property, the podcast for property owners looking for reliable, accurate, and bite-sized information from an experienced and authoritative source. To access previous episodes and useful strata tips, go to www.yourstrataproperty.com.au. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Amanda Farmer, and today I'm bringing you our final podcast episode for this year, 2020. I will be packing up the mic after this one, but only for a couple of weeks. I will be back with you in the first week of January 2021. The team and I have been digging into some stats over the past week, and today I've decided to share with you our top 5 podcast episodes for the year. Now, this is based on the number of times each episode has been downloaded. This is, of course, not an exact science. Older episodes do have more downloads simply because they've been published for longer. But we can extrapolate a fairly reliable list from the numbers. I'm going to count down from number 5, our 5th most popular episode for the year, down to our most popular number 1. All of the links direct to each episode I'm going to mention are over in our show notes, which you'll find over at yourstrataproperty.com.au/podcasts. Just find this episode, number 245, in the list, and you will find the notes for this episode. That's also where you can access the transcript. We do produce transcripts for every podcast episode. These are quite popular for those who may not have the time to listen to the audio of the podcast and you want to scan through a written version or share it with your strata manager or your fellow committee members. Free download of the transcript. The link is in the notes for every podcast episode. Now let's jump straight into it. Our 5th most popular podcast episode for the year 2020. This was episode number 217, my chat with strata lawyer David Edwards. Back in June, David had just come off a win for the Horizon apartment building in Sydney. That may be a name familiar to many of you. This was the NCAT appeal panel decision that actually upheld the Horizon's ban on the keeping of pets in the building. David explained why it was that the appeal panel had overturned the earlier decision of the tribunal, which found that pet bans were harsh, unconscionable, or oppressive. The interesting thing about this case, of course, as many of you will know, is that Joe Cooper appealed against this decision, and ultimately the appeal panel's finding was overturned by our Court of Appeal in New South Wales. So these numbers really tell us how popular this topic was right throughout the year. The follow-up to this episode is indeed my chat with Joe Cooper and her lawyer, Sharon Levy, after they won their Court of Appeal case. That's in episode number 236. That is an edited version of the live chat that I had with Joe and Sharon over on our Facebook page. So it is indeed interesting, I think, to have a listen, first of all, to my chat with David Edwards, episode 217, about the NCAT appeal panel's decision, and then dig into some of the reasons why that decision was overturned when you tune in to episode number 236. I think when we look back on 2020, amongst some other things, certainly in the context of strata, we will be remembering this case as one of the most significant and impactful cases for our communities. Coming in at number 4 in our top 5 list, episode number 194, The Art of Crisis Management with Daniel Holt. This episode was published quite early in the year. Daniel is a strata manager, formerly a strata lawyer, And we talked about how to stay calm in a crisis. And Daniel indeed would know. He was the manager who received the phone call on Christmas Eve 2018 informing him that Opal Tower needed to be evacuated. In our conversation, we talked about how you know when it's time to refer a difficult issue to outside experts, whether strata managers should receive the same professional recognition as strata lawyers, how our legislation is failing us when it comes to crisis situations. Now, as well as wanting to have the inside scoop on managing the Opal Tower crisis, I think this episode has been so popular because of the promise of answers to those really important questions. So check out episode 194 with Daniel Holt if you haven't already. At number 3 in this top 5 list of the most popular podcast episodes for 2020, one of my chats with my often co-host Rena Van Alst. Episode number 213. Rena and I covered off what to do about a dysfunctional strata committee. That got plenty of attention. Whether disclosing the expiry date of an agency agreement on the front page of the agreement is sufficient compliance with Section 50 of the New South Wales Strata Schemes Management Act. A little technical one there for you. How to amend motions during a general meeting without sending the room into chaos. And how creative buildings are convening general meetings during the pandemic. Now, if you're new to the podcast, you will soon pick up that Rena and I have a chat about our strata wins and challenges about once a fortnight. And I am told by strata managers and committee members alike that you find these chats really helpful as we often dig into some of the nitty-gritty of our strata legislation, and both Rena and I can bring to the table our practical day-to-day experiences working with communities, working with residents, and solving common problems that I know so many of you are experiencing. Moving on down the list, at number 2, we have episode number 198. This episode was all about the unlimited liability of strata property owners. Now, this was not actually an interview conducted by me. It's an interview conducted by Veronica Morgan and Chris Bates. They were interviewing me over on their podcast, The Elephant in the Room. Now, Veronica and Chris asked me to explain this little known aspect of strata property ownership that can have big consequences should things go wrong. The concept of unlimited liability. Now, when looking at the stats, I was a little surprised that this one was so high up the list. It's something that I don't think is talked about very much, but has certainly come to the fore when looking at communities such as Mascot Tower here in Sydney and what the impact of that massive liability is going to be on the owners in that building. I certainly get into that in my chat with Veronica and Chris. This is not the first time that the Elephant in the Room property podcast has had a cameo here on our own podcast. As recently as episode number 241, I brought you another chat between myself and Veronica Morgan. We talked about the common misunderstandings of new strata owners, how to avoid a renovation headache by making a smarter purchasing decision, and I shared my latest experience of lackluster record keeping. Also in episode number 160, not from 2020, but an interview Veronica and Chris conducted with John Roydhouse, the CEO of the Institute of Public Works Engineering Australasia, as well as Jonathan Russell, the National Manager of Public Affairs at Engineers Australia. In their chat, which I share with you in episode 160, they call out some huge elephants in the room when it comes to new apartment buildings, defects in new apartment buildings, including why it is that 7 out of 10 new residential apartment buildings have defects. Veronica Morgan herself has been a guest here on the podcast, episode number 55 on why strata purchasers should work with a buyer's agent, and episode number 115, covering off some rookie strata errors. Now, drumroll please. Our most popular podcast episode for the year 2020. Maybe you've been able to guess it. It is episode number 204, my special edition published in March. Coronavirus. Can we avoid in-person strata meetings? This has been our most downloaded episode of 2020. I released it over a weekend. The first time I've done that in the almost 5 years of this podcast. I answered a question many owners, committee members, strata managers had been asking in that week in particular. What do we do now that we have been locked down? We have been told that we cannot have gatherings in excess of a particular number of people. Must we still hold our strata meetings in person? How do we reduce the risk and spread of infection? Is there a legal way to avoid in-person meetings? So that episode was your then short guide to the state of the law in New South Wales when it came to strata meetings in particular. And boy, did we then jump on the roller coaster. The law was changing quite regularly across the country, updates to our public health orders, different requirements in different states. That's around the time that I started our Friday afternoon Facebook Live chats to bring you those updates and make sure that everybody was as comfortable or as least uncomfortable navigating this strange new world. So I have to say, I am not surprised that that episode is our most popular for 2020. If you do want to go back and have a listen, bear in mind that things have changed significantly since then. And hopefully it is not a place that we end up again. But if we do, we certainly have the tools, the strategies, the procedures and structures now in place to best deal with that. And that is something for us all to be proud of. So those are our top 5 most popular podcast episodes for this very strange year that has been 2020. I have so enjoyed bringing the podcast to you each week this year, just as I have enjoyed introducing our Friday live chats over on the Facebook page as well. I can't wait to be back with you for 2021. What will it hold? Who the heck knows? But whatever new challenges we are faced with, we will work through them together. That's for sure. Stay safe, stay sane, rest up. I'll catch you in 2021.
Thank you for listening to Your Strata Property, the podcast which consistently delivers to property owners reliable and accurate information about their strata property. You can access all the information below this episode via the show notes at www.yourstrataproperty.com.au. You can also ask questions in the comments section, which Amanda will answer in her upcoming episodes. How can Amanda help you today?